Welcome to the Aquarius Theory.
What's good, family? So this is going to be the Virgo season transit video, and of course that's going to be when the sun enters into a new sign, and the themes that we can kind of expect for the next 30 days. 30 days. Shout out to the Virgos. Happy solar return. Hopefully it's a lit month for y'all. Now, if you follow my content, you know that when we talk about transits, seeing what is being aspected at the moment of its ingress is going to tell us a lot about what we can kind of expect throughout the course of the transit itself. And so, with the sun being in Virgo, we understand Virgo energy is all about, changing what it is that we're seeing, right? Virgo is mutable earth. And so, Virgo in and of itself, because it is, kind of centered around improvement or refinement, there is a need for us to maybe change, the things that we've been doing or the things that we've been observing, right? There's a need for us to maybe improve in some areas. And so we can kind of see that taking shape. We have the sun in a conjunction with the south node, but also in a conjunction with Mercury. Now, this is important because, again, we just had that solar eclipse about 2 weeks ago. This week, we do have a lunar eclipse in Pisces that's very prominent. And so, with the sun being in a conjunction with the south node, we understand that the south node represents decrease. Mercury itself is a planet that does symbolize communication, critical thinking, messages, travel as well. And with Mercury being in Leo, which would be in regards to the sun in Virgo, Mercury being the ruler, being, 12 houses away, there are certain things that we might be thinking, certain things that we might have considered that we probably need to let go of, right? And this is what this Virgo season is highlighting: is, what are our conscious thoughts and beliefs? How are we, consciously operating in our lives? Because we have the sun making a sextile to the descendant, which is actually going to be 3 houses away. And the descendant, what I often highlight to people is that the descendant is going to represent aspects that you have that you look for in other people, right? Not super major influence, but it's just something to know, right? Especially with the descendant at the time of this sun ingress into Virgo, the descendant being in Scorpio, right? And Scorpio is a sign that typically represents transformation, especially since it's showing up in the Sagittarius 12th part. So again, how are we communicating? How are we expressing ourselves to other people, especially people close to us? Because maybe that does need to change. We have the sun making a trine to Lilith, the lot of spirit, and the moon. Now, Lilith represents suppressed tendencies and desires. It's in Sagittarius. I often highlight to people with Sagittarius energy, there's a theme surrounded around us, maybe sharing our knowledge and wisdom with other people. And the fact that this Lilith at 27 degrees and 28 minutes is showing up in the Libra 12th part, are we actually doing that? Are we actually sharing our understanding, our knowledge with other people? The Lilith would suppose that we're probably not, especially since this is a trine, which is a harmonious aspect. Remember, Sun, South Node conjunction, Mercury being here. We are probably being more reserved when it comes to actually communicating and saying the things that probably need to be said to the people that we probably need to say these things to. Right now, because we see the lot of spirit, typically represents what the soul is yearning for. It can represent aspects of career and livelihood as well, intelligence as well. And the fact that this lot of spirit is in a conjunction with the moon is in detriment in Capricorn, but this moon in Capricorn, because the moon does represent us on a more physical and emotional level, there is this aspect with the moon being at 2 degrees and 38 minutes showing up in this Aquarius 12 part, where there is a need for us to transcend maybe certain system structures, boundaries that we probably place on ourselves, right? We got to remember that this moon in Capricorn is being ruled by the Saturn in Aries, which is retrograde, right? And so again, there's a need for us to maybe transcend certain limitations, right? Maybe we put ourselves in a box, and maybe in order for us to get where we're trying to go, we need to transcend those very same limitations. You have the sun making an opposition to the north node being in Aquarius. Aquarius deals with intelligence and authenticity, and maybe we haven't been truly as authentic as we probably could and should be, right? Remember, Aquarius does deal with collectivism as well, and so it's less focused about just purely what you want, purely what you're thinking, and there is more of a consideration of other people, but this may be again in opposition. There could be real tension between, jumping from the space of just thinking solely about self and potentially thinking about other people. The sun is also going to be making a trine to Chiron as well as the ascendant. Now, Chiron, because it does represent traumatic wounds and experiences that we do need to heal, trauma in and of itself that we need to heal. It being in Taurus, the sign that tends to symbolize value. There are certain, wounds that do affect us in our ability to show up, to express ourselves, to, be seen in a light of being able to potentially provide value, not just to other people, but even how we think about ourselves. Right. And so it's important that we review these wounds because, again, how we, think, affects how we show up in the world. And then we have the sun making this square to Uranus. And Uranus is the planet of liberation, freedom, sudden changes, explosions in and of itself, right? But because this Uranus is in Gemini, Gemini is the sign that tends to symbolize giving and receiving information. There is a need for us to liberate ourselves by maybe, freeing ourselves from old ways of thinking. Remember, this Uranus in Gemini is ruled by this Mercury in Leo in a conjunction with the South Node as well as the Sun. So, yes, we've probably been holding on to a certain way of looking at certain things. And this Virgo season is asking us to let some of those ideologies, certain, concepts, certain ways of looking at ourselves and the world around us, and to free ourselves from those old ways of operating. Because in order for us to liberate ourselves, change has to be implemented. As always, we're going to start off by going through all 12 signs, as it pertains to this Virgo season and how some of these themes may show up for you on a more personal level. You definitely want to look in, listen to your sun sign as well as your rising sign. I can argue that the rising sign is probably going to be more important, but looking at your sun sign is also important as well. All right, we're starting off with Virgo because it is Virgo season. Let's get into it. So, Virgos, all right, we do have our ruler, Mercury, in the 12th house of Leo. And so, what is important to understand is that, because of the Mercury in a conjunction with the South Node representing decrease, Mercury in Leo is very much us communicating, expressing ourselves. There are certain ways that we probably could improve when it comes to how we are expressing ourselves. Maybe we are limiting how much we are expressing ourselves, and maybe that is affecting how we're showing up and how we're being perceived by other people. Remember, the sun is in Virgo. This is a big focus for us, mutual reception between the 1st and the 12th. There are some things we need to let go of, and this Virgo season is a perfect opportunity for us to do so. Right? We kind of highlighted that, in the overview video, how the sun is making a sextile to the descendant, right? That descendants showing up in our third house, media environment, lessons that we're here to learn. There are some things that we need to do differently, things that we probably need to release, and this probably can go back into, maybe how we think about ourselves, right? Maybe there are some things that we do need to release in that format. Now, in that regard, you have the sun making a trine to Lilith in the fourth house, the lot of spirit, as well as the moon in the fifth house. And with, the sun making a trine to Lilith in the fourth house tends to represent home and family, parents. And so, family dynamics in and of itself, maybe there are some things that we probably need to communicate and or express to family. Maybe we feel like nothing's going to change, so what's the point of me speaking up about it? Give yourself more credit, give yourself more of an opportunity to express yourself. Remember, this Lilith is in a conjunction with a lot of spirit and the moon. That moon Lilith, conjunction is more important than the lot of spirit. The lot of spirit does represent what the soul is yearning for. It is in our fifth house of the things that bring us joy and pleasure. It may be because of the lack of you, communicating and or expressing yourself. You're limiting yourself from your ability to actually engage in the things that bring you joy and pleasure, which I would assume has a lot to do with the people you care about the most, right? The moon being in Capricorn, being ruled by the Saturn in Aries in your eighth house, is very prominent. But again, it is going to be important for us to transcend these old ways of operating, right? Don't limit yourself and don't limit other people, right? Because again, that can be viewed as a form of projection. And we can kind of see this take place with the sun making an opposition to the North Node being in your sixth house of health and sickness, service to others, daily tasks. And with the North Node being here in Aquarius, also ruled by the Saturn and Aries in your eighth house, maybe you are limiting yourself and other people, right? But maybe this is because of self doubt. Maybe this is because of the criticism, right? As Virgos, we do have this tendency to be, perfectionists. And it may be important for us to let some of those, overly perfectionist tendencies go, right? Because nobody's perfect, right? And this is where we get the sun making that trine to Chiron in the ninth house, because again, this is all about our philosophy. And because we have certain wounds as it pertains to us being able to provide value, not just to other people, but even seeing the value within ourselves, this is affecting how we're showing up, how we are expressing ourselves, which is ultimately causing the tension with the sun making a square to Uranus in your 10th house of public image, reputation, status, rank, and authority. It is important for us to implement some changes. It's important for us to really see ourselves in a different light. And if you can't see yourself in a different light, it's going to be hard for you to see anybody else in a different light as well. And so it's going to be important for us to free ourselves by changing how we are looking at ourselves and people around us. Libras. So we do have this Virgo season really kicking off our 12th house. The sun in Virgo in the 12th in a conjunction with the South Node and Mercury is just putting a focus on not just ourselves, but who are the people that we keep around us? Are we overlooking certain things in other individuals? Remember, the ruler of Libra is Venus. Venus is still in the first house, but again, it is making this opposition to Saturn in the seventh, and so relationship dynamics is definitely showing up. Now, the sun in Virgo, it is making a trine to the Lilith as well as the moon and the lot of spirit. The thing is with Lilith is that Lilith represents suppressed tendencies and desires. It's in Sagittarius in the third house. People within our immediate environment, people closest to us, lessons that we're here to learn as well. There are some things that we do need to change, and we are maybe being reluctant to implement those changes. This is where we are putting ourselves in a box. Moon in Capricorn, moon showing up in a conjunction with a lot of spirit. There's things that we're yearning for. We need structure, we need commitment, we need, you know, effort. But if we're not receiving that from the people that we care about, the people that we're maybe pouring our energy into, do we need to continue to show up the same way we've been showing up? This is something that you're gonna have to really, analyze and decide for yourself. But remember, the moon in Capricorn is being ruled by the Saturn and Aries in your seventh house of relationships as well. So just something to think about. The sun is also going to be making an opposition to the North Node in Aquarius in your fifth house of the things that bring you joy and pleasure. We understand with the North Node being in Aquarius of the things that bring us joy and pleasure, ruled by the Saturn and Aries as well in your seventh house, that you love people. But again, with the sun being in your 12th house, again, which can kind of symbolize hidden enemies, maybe there's people that we're keeping around us that we probably need to move off of, or move away from, and only you will be able to make that decision yourself. But don't limit yourself from the things that you want, especially if you're showing up for somebody and they're not necessarily showing up for you the same way you're showing up for them. Okay, set the boundaries. This sun is making a trine to Chiron in your eighth house of shared resources, other people's possessions and values. And so it's important to understand that, we can't operate out of our trauma, out of our wounds, that, hey, I'm going to show up consistently for these other people because I haven't had people show up for me. And, while yes, we do want to provide service to these other people, yes, we do want these other people to be able to rely on us. At what cost? All right. And this is why we see this square between the sun and Uranus being in your ninth house of philosophy, higher knowledge. Because again, it's important for us to really consider that, we may be operating out of an old mindset, an old way of looking at things, looking at people, looking at certain relationships. And in order for us to free ourselves, in order for us to really, step into this sense of abundance, with Jupiter being in Leo, Mercury being in Leo, at least for the moment, we want to really be surrounded by people who see us for who we are. And if we're only, surrounding ourselves with people based off of trauma and trauma based systems, then you can understand why we are having such issues in our relationships as of now. Scorpios. So we do have this Virgo season taking place in our 11th house: goals, dreams, aspirations, friends, networks, communities. The ruler of Scorpio is Mars. Mars is in our ninth house of philosophy, higher knowledge, And the thing is, Mars is fallen in Cancer. Mars, is a planet of action. It being in Cancer, we're more passive, more indirect when it comes to taking certain actions, and we can kind of see that as it pertains to how we may be showing up, how we're actually standing in our authority, and maybe that's what needs to change this Virgo season. The biggest thing though is that the Sun is making a trine to Lilith as well as the Moon in the Lot of Fortune. Now the thing is that with the Sun making a trine to Lilith, Lilith being in our second house of possessions, resources, values, personal possessions in and of itself, maybe there are some things that we need to change. Maybe there's some things that we can be doing differently, and maybe we've been reluctant to implement those changes, those new ways of operating. Maybe we've been reluctant to implement those changes. The thing is that with the Sun making a trine to the Moon, we are only limiting ourselves from what it is that we truly want and desire and what we're truly yearning for. You are setting these limitations on yourself based off of the things that you're doing consistently on a day-to-day basis, and we see that with the Moon being in Capricorn, but being ruled by this Saturn in Aries in your sixth house of health, sickness, daily routines, right? So you're limiting yourself, and if you want to, free yourself from these limitations, there are some things that we need to do differently, right? Moon, Mars opposition, right? You literally have to do different. Now, the thing is that this Sun is making an opposition to the North Node in your fourth house of home and family. There is a big focus on the home environment. This is going to be the case for the next year and a half for you, right? And so with the North Node being in Aquarius, the North Node in Aquarius is ruled by the Saturn in Aries as well, health, sickness, service to others. And so again, you don't want to limit yourself by not taking actions in the ways in which you probably need to be taking action. And so it's just going to be important to be considerate of not just yourself and what you got going on, but of other people as well. And that is why your Sun is in Virgo in your 11th house, right? Because it's not just about you, it's about other people too, right? But again, your Sun is making a trine to Chiron in your 7th house of relationship. There are certain wounds that you have as it pertains to relationships in and of itself, and these wounds could cause you to maybe be more focused on just self and how you're looking at the situation and circumstance. But again, Sun, South Node, Mercury conjunction, these are things that we probably do need to change. And this is why we see the Sun making a square to Uranus in your 8th house of shared resources. Because again, if you're only looking at things from your perspective and how you consider these things, is going to inevitably cause tension between you and other people, right? You can't be in a joint partnership or a joint venture with somebody else and then you're only thinking about self. And so there are going to be unexpected events, maybe unexpected conversations that do take shape around these areas. And so it would just be best if you just, jump on the ball, don't be passive, don't be indirect about making the changes that you ultimately know that you need to make. Sagittarius. So we do have this Virgo season putting a focus on our 10th house, public image, reputation, status, rank, and authority. Now, the ruler of Sagittarius is Jupiter. Jupiter is in your 9th house of higher knowledge, wisdom, philosophy. And, it's important for us to maybe change how we're operating based off of, the new wisdom that we've probably come across with Jupiter being in our 9th house. The thing is that the Sun is making a trine to Lilith, the Lot of Spirit, and the Moon. Now, Lilith is in your first house, has been in your first house for a while now, and Lilith represents suppressed tendencies and desires. There are certain changes that you probably need to implement that you probably already know of at this point, just to bring things into a better state of balance for you personally. The thing is that the Moon is in Capricorn. The Moon represents us on a more physical and emotional level, and it's in our second house of possessions, riches, resources, and property. And so the things that we ultimately value, we understand that there's effort that goes into that, and maybe making these changes personally will put us in a better position to be able to really sustain ourselves, really build up our personal value. The thing is that this Moon in Capricorn is being ruled by the Saturn in Aries. And with Saturn in Aries in our 5th house of the things that bring us joy and pleasure, maybe we're limiting ourselves from what we're actually really trying to accomplish, because there could be maybe a sense of overindulgence, right? Maybe we're being passive about actually implementing the changes that need to be implemented. And maybe you're being passive in this regard because it's not necessarily what you want, but it might be, what's important for other people, right? That can come up, right? We see that this sun is making an opposition to the North Node in your third house. If you're a media environment, the people, places, and things within your media environment, lessons that we're here to learn. And with your North Node being in Aquarius, because again, Aquarius deals with collectivism, we have to think not just about ourselves, but the people closest to us as well. Remember, this North Node is also being ruled by the Saturn in Aries in your fifth house. How are the things that bring you joy and pleasure? How is that affecting you and your ability to engage with the people closest to you? Because there could be limitations, there could be things that we can do better in that regard. Now, the Sun is making a trine to Chiron. Chiron shows up in the sixth house. Sixth house represents health, sickness, service to others, daily tasks, pets, and travel. And so Taurus is all about consistency. So what are we consistently doing? Right? Because, that Chiron and Taurus in the sixth house, it is being ruled by Venus and Libra in the 11th house. Other people, goals, dreams, and aspirations. Are we limiting ourselves? Are we actually showing up the way that we need to in order to accomplish what we're trying to accomplish? Or are we allowing our pleasures to stop us from getting the things that we truly want and desire? Only we can, decide that based off of how we've been operating on a consistent day-to-day basis. But again, because we see this sun is making a square to Uranus in our seventh house of relationships, whether you understand it or not, these habits that we're doing consistently could be causing tension between you and somebody else, right? Your partner, whether this is romantic, platonic, business related, friends, or family, the things in which you're doing on a day-to-day basis could be affecting you and your relationships. And it's important for you to liberate yourself. Maybe simply changing how you're looking at the situation, circumstance. Maybe it's not you having to give up something, right? Because again, that's kind of that Venus and Libra, right? Is give and take, right? It's balance. And you need to understand balance because again, as a Sagittarius ruled by Jupiter, there is a tendency for overindulgence. And in order for you to liberate yourself and find harmony between you and somebody else, you're going to have to find that balance point. Capricorns. So we do have this sun in Virgo happening in our ninth house of philosophy, higher wisdom, higher knowledge in and of itself. And the thing is that Capricorn is ruled by Saturn. Saturn is in our fourth house of home and family. And so the thing is that with this Virgo season, there is a need to change. And this is really the mindset that we have. We need to change the mindset, especially as it pertains to not just us personally, but how we engage with other people, how we show up for other people, how we express ourselves for other people. There is a need for change. The thing is that this sun in Virgo, it is making a trine to Lilith in the 12th house, as well as a lot of spirit and the moon in the first house. And so this trine to Lilith, it just implements what we are just highlighting, the need for change. Lilith is suppressed tendencies and desires. Sagittarius is very much about doing different things, and it's in the 12th house. We're, suppressing the need to change. Why is that though? Right? Is a lot of it is based off of this mentality that we have. And maybe we don't see the value. Maybe we don't see why we should change, right? But again, don't put yourself in a box. Capricorns do have a tendency to be more conservative. The moon is in Capricorn. The moon represents us on a more physical and emotional level, is in a conjunction with a lot of spirit, is actually making an opposition to Mars in your seventh house of relationships. So you implementing these changes isn't solely just for you. These changes could be important for the people that you deal with on a very personal level as well. Now, we see the sun making a opposition to the North Node. The North Node is in your second house of possessions, riches, resources, property, value, personal value in and of itself. And if you value people, the people that you care about, it's important for you to implement necessary changes in this regard. But again, we can't be limiting ourselves because both Capricorn and Aquarius is ruled by Saturn. And with Saturn being in Aries, retrograde, we do need to review certain limitations that we're setting on ourselves based off of the things in which we're doing, right? And that shows up. And so this sun is also making a trine to Chiron. Chiron is in your fifth house of the things that bring you joy and pleasure. And maybe if you feel as though you're not able to engage in the things that bring you joy and pleasure, then why are you, making or implementing certain changes for other people that will give them joy and pleasure, right? That's kind of how I'm looking at it. But, in and of itself, this Chiron and Taurus in your fifth house is being ruled by the Venus and Libra in your 10th house. And with Venus making an opposition to Saturn in your fourth house of home and family foundation, um, what are the standards that we're setting for ourselves and other people? Because again, Venus and Libra is very much about harmony, is very much about reciprocity. And if you're going to limit other people, then it's going to be other people that are ultimately going to limit you. And that may not necessarily be what we want. So, this is why it's important to implement those changes. But nonetheless, Venus and Libra ruling over the Chiron and Taurus is important for us to bring things into a greater state of harmony, especially as it pertains to the things that bring us joy and pleasure. And this is something we can do on a more consistent basis, right? We see the sun making a square to Uranus. Uranus is the planet of liberation, freedom, sudden changes, and it's in the sixth house of health, sickness, service to others, in the sign of Gemini, which is very much about change, adaptability. And there's things that we're doing on a day-to-day basis that we do need to change. We've probably been operating a certain way for quite some time, with Mercury being in Leo in a conjunction with the South Node, um, having mutual reception with the Sun in Virgo. Right. And so this mentality that we have affect what it is that we're doing on a day-to-day basis, and maybe that is ultimately what has to change, is the mentality, because we are keeping ourselves from truly seeing that type of expansion or abundance that could be possible. Remember, Jupiter is in Leo where Mercury is at, and so things can change very quickly, but we have to be willing to change as well. Aquarius. So we have this Virgo season putting a focus on our eighth house, shared resources, other people's possessions, business, debts, taxes, investments. And because of the mutual reception between the Sun in Virgo and Mercury in Leo, is very much dealing with us focusing on the things that we have with other people. And with the Sun in Virgo making a trine to Lilith in our 11th house. 11th house represents our goals, dreams, and aspirations. Lilith represents suppressed tendencies and desires. And so there are some things that we are suppressing that we probably do need to communicate to other people. Why aren't we doing so? The Sun is making a trine to the lot of spirit as well as the Moon. The Moon being in Capricorn, the Moon represents us on a more physical and emotional level, is in our 12th house. And so maybe we put ourselves in this box. And maybe we need to liberate ourselves from this box in and of itself. Maybe we're not necessarily expressing or communicating our feelings and emotions to other people. Again, why are we doing that? Maybe that is something that does need to change. We do have the Sun making an opposition to the North Node. The North Node is in your first house of self. And so, again, there is a big focus on self. And we can't focus on self if we're only thinking about how we can provide service, value, be there for other people. Remember that your Moon in a lot of spirit, as well as this North Node and Pluto in Capricorn and Aquarius, respectively, is all being ruled by the Saturn in Aries in the third house, right? Lessons that we're here to learn. We are limiting ourselves, and we may need to review why we are limiting ourselves, right? Because it may not be ultimately what we want. And so, when we look at that from the perspective of the Sun in Virgo, right, these changes that need to be implemented, the Sun is also making a trine to Chiron. Chiron represents traumatic wounds or experiences, is in our fourth house of home and family. So this could be past experiences, past wounds that we sustain, centered around value and maybe wanting to showcase the value that we present to other people. But again, Venus and Libra, right, representing reciprocity, is important for us to understand that, yeah, we can try to show up and provide value to other people, but again, those other people have to see the value that we inherently have as well, right? It's not a, one way ticket. Yeah, it's not that. And so we can kind of see that causing tension, because the Sun is making a square to Uranus. Uranus is in our fifth house of the things that bring us joy and pleasure. Uranus is a planet of liberation, freedom, sudden changes, Gemini, adaptability, learning and understanding. And so, yeah, things are changing. We are understanding things differently. We are learning and understanding things from our relationship dynamics a little bit differently. And so, there is a need for us to maybe stop holding people to a certain standard and really just kind of see things for what they are. And so it's going to be important just to, make sure that we're putting ourselves in the best position possible. But again, don't be afraid to implement the changes that need to be implemented. Take accountability for the role that you play in these dynamics with other people. Pisces. So we do have this Virgo season putting an emphasis on our seventh house of relationships. And, with the ruler of Virgo, I meant the ruler of Pisces being Jupiter, Jupiter being in our sixth house of the things that we're doing on a day to day basis, health, sickness, service to others. There is a bigger focus on us making sure that we're doing what we need to do for ourselves so that we can be there for other people as well. Remember, Virgo does like to be of service. And so, we do have this sun in Virgo, making a trine to Lilith as well as the lot of spirit and the moon. Now, Lilith is in our 10th house of our public image, reputation, status, rank, and authority. There could be, changes that need to be implemented based off of how we're showing up, things that we probably are expressing or could be expressing. Maybe there's a need for us to do things differently. Maybe we're suppressing that for whatever reason. And, this could come off as, being inherently cold in the eyes of other people, right? Moon and Capricorn in our 11th house. 11th house is our goals, dreams, and aspirations, friends, and associates. And so, yeah, we can be coming off cold. That's not necessarily what we want. And so, again, it is going to be important for us to maybe transcend these limitations that we are setting on ourselves. Now, the sun is making an opposition to the North Node. The North Node is in your 12th house. 12th house represents secrets, isolation, confinement, hidden enemies. And so it's important for us to understand that with this moon and a lot of spirit, as well as the North Node and Aquarius, they're all being ruled by the Saturn in Aries in your second house of personal value. And so if you value being seen, if you value not telling anybody anything, maybe avoiding, as Pisces like to do, avoiding expressing or communicating certain shit, is going to be perceived a certain way in the eyes of other people. Right, as long as you know that tidbit of information. But again, it's going to be important that we maybe transcend those limitations that we are personally setting on ourselves. The sun in Virgo is making a trine to Chiron. Chiron is in our third house of our immediate environment, lessons that we're here to learn. And there's lessons that we need to learn about consistency, value, worth. What are the foundations that we're ultimately setting for ourselves and for other people as well? Because with this Chiron being ruled by Venus, Venus actually being in your eighth house of shared resources, other people's values, reciprocity is important, right, to other people. And if you want people to show up a certain way for you, you can't limit yourself by not showing up for them the way that they need you to show up for them, right? It's give and take. And this is what we understand because, again, we do see that the sun in Virgo is making a square to Uranus. Uranus is in Gemini. It is in the fourth house of home, family, foundation. Uranus is sudden changes. It is unexpected events that can take place. And with it being in the fourth house, Gemini, the foundation is changing. Things are changing within the home environment, family dynamics, relationships between you and other people, people that you care about. It's going to be important for you to communicate, to express yourself. And if you've been holding on to a certain way of operating because that's how you've been operating for a certain amount of time, it is important for you to understand that things are changing, and so you have to change as well. Don't limit yourself by not implementing the changes that need to be implemented. Aries. So we do have this Virgo season putting a focus on our sixth house, health, sickness, service to others, daily tasks, pets, and travel. And the ruler of Aries is Mars. Mars is in our fourth house, home and family. Mars is fallen in Cancer. Mars doesn't like to be here. Mars is all about action. Cancer tends to be more passive and indirect, and so we could be more passive about taking certain actions. How is that affecting us and what we're doing on a more day-to-day basis? That's what we're here to discuss. There are some changes that need to be implemented. We do see that the sun in Virgo is making a trine to Lilith in our ninth house, is also making a trine to the lot of spirit and the moon. Lilith in the ninth house, Lilith is suppressed tendencies and desires, is in our ninth house of philosophy, mindset, higher knowledge in and of of itself. And, maybe there's some things that we do need to implement, some changes we probably do need to implement, especially on a more, mental level. And maybe we're being reluctant to implement these changes, right? Maybe it's for the best, but for whatever reason, we're limiting ourselves. And we can see that with the trine to the moon and the lot of spirit. Now, the moon does represent us on a more physical and emotional level, is in a conjunction with the lot of spirit, what the soul is yearning for, aspects of career potentially, is in our 10th house of public image, reputation, authority. And so, how are we limiting ourselves from really stepping into our authority based off of how we're operating on a more day to day basis? We see that the sun in Virgo is making an opposition to the North Node. North Node represents, increase, is in the 11th house of our goals, dreams, and aspirations, friends, networks, community. The thing is that this North Node, while it is putting an emphasis or a focus on other people, right, on ourselves, our dreams, our goals, both this moon, lot of spirit, and North Node are all being ruled by the Saturn and Aries in the first house. We are literally limiting ourselves based off of the actions in which we're taking. And this is what ultimately needs to change. We do see that the sun is making a trine to Chiron. Chiron represents traumatic wounds or experiences, is in the second house of Taurus, right? The second house is dealing with our values, our personal possessions, and Taurus deals with value and self worth to a certain degree. And so, our personal self worth, maybe we have certain wounds attached. Maybe there's certain things that we feel like, oh, well, I can't do this or I can't do that or I don't have XYZ. We got to kind of remember that, the Chiron and Taurus is ruled by Venus in Libra in your seventh house of relationships. And so maybe your value, maybe your sense of self worth is coming from other people. And maybe because of how other people are navigating life and what they got going on, maybe that is causing you to limit yourself because you're not where they're at. But we're all on our own journey. Remember that. You got to remember that the sun is making a square to Uranus. Uranus is in your third house of your immediate environment, lessons that you're here to learn. And with Uranus being in Gemini, is liberation, is freedom, is sudden changes, and things change quickly. Things can change quickly for you only if you allow yourself to implement the changes that need to be implemented. Remember that the sun in Virgo is ruled by the Mercury in Leo in your fifth house of the things that bring you joy and pleasure. And so if you haven't taken time to engage in the things that bring you joy and pleasure on a more day-to-day basis, and you're only looking at things pessimistically, then we can kind of understand why we are limited in our ability to actually obtain the things that we want to desire. You have to change your outlook to change your input. Right, I don't know if that makes sense, but as a Aries, keep it simple, right? Just make some changes as it pertains to the things that you're doing on a day-to-day basis. Don't be super passive or indirect about implementing these changes, and you'll be fine. Taurus. So we do have this Virgo season putting a focus on our fifth house, the things that bring us joy and pleasure, children, gambling, hobbies, fortune, honor, as well as generosity. And the thing is that the ruler of Taurus is Venus. Venus is in our sixth house of health, sickness, service to others, daily tasks, pets, and travel. And so there is this overwhelming need for us to bring things into a greater sense of harmony, because again, as it pertains to the things that bring us joy and pleasure in and of itself, there are probably some things that we can be doing differently, right? When we look at the sun is making a trine to Lilith, is also making a trine to the lot of spirit, as well as the moon. Lilith represents suppressed tendencies and desires, is in our eighth house of other people, shared resources. There are maybe certain conversations that we need to have with family, with loved ones, with people that we care about. Maybe we've been reluctant to have those conversations, and that is ultimately causing us to feel limited in our ability to operate, right? The moon in Capricorn represents ambition, hard work, structure, commitment, and the moon is us on a more physical and emotional level. And so having this moon in a conjunction with a lot of spirit, kind of shows that, there are some things that we're yearning for, but we have to be willing to free ourselves from these limitations that we've set on ourselves based off of the mindset that we have. Now, the moon in Capricorn is being ruled by the Saturn in Aries in our 12th house, and so these are limitations that we're setting on ourselves, just so you know. The sun is making an opposition to the North Node. North Node is in your 10th house of public image, reputation, status, rank, and authority. This North Node in Aquarius, again, Aquarius deals with collective collectivism, it deals with intelligence. You're a very intelligent individual. So please, don't limit yourself by limiting how you're looking at certain situations, circumstances, right? There are changes that probably need to be implemented, and we may just be passive about implementing these changes. Maybe there's changes we don't necessarily want to implement, but will probably be the best for all parties involved, right? The sun is making a trine to Chiron. Chiron is in the first house. The first house does represent self, right? And so there are certain traumas, certain wounds that we've sustained, maybe at the hands of other people, but in and of itself, value, self worth, right? If there's a focus on our public image and our ability to stand in our authority, right, it's important that we heal these wounds that are ultimately stopping us from doing that. And we can see that there's tension because of the sun making a square to Uranus. Uranus being in your second house of money, finances, resources, unexpected events that can take place, sudden changes. And so, Gemini is all about adaptability. And so we do need to understand that when it comes to certain values, certain things that, certain possessions that we have, there are some things that ultimately do need to be changed in order for us to liberate ourselves, maybe bring in more potentially, excuse me. There could be things that could bring in more opportunity for us if we allow ourselves to change. But again, with the sun being in Virgo, having mutual reception with Mercury and Leo, being stubborn is not going to be the route to go. And I know as a Taurus, we like to be stubborn, but this ain't the time for that. Okay. Gemini. So we do have this Virgo season putting a focus on our fourth house, home, family, hometown, parents, right? And with the ruler of Gemini being Mercury, Mercury being in Leo in our third house, there are some things that we need to change, especially as it pertains to the foundation that we're setting, right? There are some things that we can be doing better, things that we can be doing differently. Now, the sun in Virgo, it is making a trine to Lilith in our seventh house of relationships. It's also making a trine to the lot of spirit and the moon in our eighth house. And so, as Geminis, we're here to communicate, we're here to express ourselves. The Mercury and Leo kind of points to that, but it's in a conjunction with the South Node. So there's old ways in which we would express ourselves that we probably need to operate differently, especially as it pertains to people that we care about and how we operate within this home environment. We see that because, again, Lilith is suppressed tendencies and desires. Sagittarius is about doing different shit. And we need to do things differently. Have we been doing that? Probably not, right? The ruler of Sagittarius is Jupiter, and Jupiter is in the third house of Leo as well. And so we probably haven't been implementing the changes we need to implement. But again, this is where we have to understand that it's probably the best if we consider how we put ourselves in a box, right? This moon, lot of spirit in Capricorn. The moon is us on a more physical and emotional level. The moon in Capricorn is in detriment. But this moon in Capricorn is being ruled by Saturn, and Saturn is in our 11th house of Aries. And so, have we limited ourselves or have we put ourselves in a box because of other people? Are there things that need to be communicated, expressed to other people that we've been reluctant to communicate and express? This is something that we do have to consider. The sun is making an opposition to the North Node. The North Node is in Aquarius in our ninth house, philosophy, higher knowledge, wisdom. And so, yeah, there are some things that we've been considering, some things that we've been thinking about, especially in regards to other people. But again, have we had those conversations? Have we been showing up authentically? Especially in public spaces, have we been going after our goals, dreams, and aspirations, like we say we want to? These are all things that we're going to have to, really keep in mind, because the sun is making a trine to Chiron in our 12th house. Chiron represents traumatic wounds or experiences. Chiron is in Taurus. Taurus deals with, value and worth, but it also deals with consistency. And, maybe there's, wounds surrounding consistency. And maybe the reason why, we have to implement these changes, especially in our immediate environment, is because things haven't been done consistently. And maybe the lack of consistency is causing us to be inconsistent. Right, we got to remember this Chiron and Taurus is being ruled by the Venus and Libra in our fifth house of the things that bring us joy and pleasure, and so we do need balance. That's what we're looking for. That's what we want, not just for ourselves personally, but definitely with other people as well. And there's some limitation coming from other people in that regard. But we do see that the sun is making a square to Uranus. Uranus is in our first house of self. Uranus represents unexpected events, sudden changes. Gemini is all about change, giving and receiving information, learning and adapting. And it's important for us to learn and adapt. This may not necessarily be what we want to do, but this is what is happening. Uranus is going to be in our first house for about 7 years. And so there's going to be a lot of sudden realizations, sudden changes. And in order for us to, implement these changes more harmoniously, I would assume it's important that we let old thought patterns, old concepts, old ideas go. All right, because the foundation that we're ultimately trying to set for ourselves and where we're trying to go, some of the things that we've dealt with before, some of the things that some of the ways in which we've looked at situations and circumstances in the past have to be released. Cancers. So we do have this Virgo season putting an emphasis on our third house, our immediate environment, lessons that we're here to learn. And the ruler of Cancer is the moon. The moon is in our seventh house of relationships. And so this Virgo season could be, causing us to really analyze our relationships with other people. Now, the sun is making a trine to Lilith, the lot of spirit, and the moon. And, Lilith represents suppressed tendencies and desires. It's in our sixth house of Sagittarius. There's probably some things that we can be doing differently as it pertains to how we operate on a day to day basis. This could be dealing with us personally, our own personal health. Maybe there's some things that we could be implementing differently in that regard. But again, there are some changes that we do need to make that will probably be of value to us if we make them. The thing is that the moon in Capricorn is in detriment. Capricorns do have a tendency to be more conservative, and so having the moon in Capricorn being your chart ruler, Cancer, we could be more conservative about implementing these changes, even though this is what the solar is yearning for, right? Moon in a conjunction with a lot of spirit. Now, the moon, because it's showing up at 2 degrees in 38 minutes, is showing up in this Aquarius 12 part. So understand this is a need for transcendence. And so we do need to implement some changes, especially in regards to our relationships. Remember, we're feeling limited because the moon in Capricorn is being ruled by the Saturn is in Aries, but the Saturn in Aries is in your 10th house of public image, reputation, status, and authority. And so you're limiting yourself from really standing in your own authority based off of not wanting to transcend certain things that you're doing and or dealing with, or people that you're dealing with. And this is where we can see the sun making opposition to the North Node, right? North Node in Aquarius in your eighth house of other people, shared resources, shared possessions and values, other people's values. And so with this North Node being in Aquarius, we do need to think about other people. But the thing is that, there's things that we do need to analyze, things that we really do need to consider about these other people, and if these people are actually bringing value to you personally. The North Node in Aquarius is also being ruled by the Saturn in Aries, and so I would assume there's some limitations in this regard. Maybe you're not really understanding if the people that you have around you are of true value or not. Give it some time, right? The sun is making a trine to Chiron. Chiron is in your 11th house of goals, dreams, aspirations, friends, networks, and associates. So again, still dealing with people. But there are wounds that we do need to heal in regards to our 11th house, right? Have we really allowed ourselves to go after the things that we truly want and desire? You got to remember Chiron in Taurus is being ruled by this Venus in Libra, right? So it's very much about reciprocity. It does deal with balance and harmony, and so we do want harmony in our relationships with other people. How are people consistently showing up for you, and how are you consistently showing up for other people? Maybe that is the limitation that does need to be addressed and or changed. But again, we have the sun in Virgo making a square to Uranus in the 12th house. 12th house representing secrets and isolation and confinement. There are sudden changes. There are things that we are learning about ourselves. Remember, this Uranus in Gemini is ruled by the Mercury in Leo in your second house of value. Mercury in a conjunction with the South Node as well, having mutual reception with the Sun in Virgo, second house of value, playing with the third house of our lessons that we're here to learn, immediate environment. So yeah, it will be important for us to implement these changes and continue to learn about ourselves, because maybe there are some epiphanies that await us if we are actually able to implement these changes and really understand where we're trying to go and how to really stand in our own authority. Last but not least, Leo. And so, Leos, we do have this Virgo season putting the emphasis on our second house, possessions, riches, resources, property, money in and of itself. And, we have mutual reception between our first house of self and our second house of value and possessions. The ruler of Virgo is Mercury. Mercury is in the first house of Leo. The ruler of Leo is the sun. The sun is in Virgo. And so, yes, we have mutual reception. There are some things that we do need to change, some things that we could probably do better. But again, with Jupiter being in Leo for the next year, it could be easy for us to be stubborn and not actually implement the changes. Let's not do that here. We do see that we have the sun making a trine to Lilith. We have the sun making a trine to the lot of spirit and the moon. Now, Lilith in Sagittarius is showing up in your fifth house of the things that bring you joy and pleasure. There are certain things that we probably do need to do differently as it pertains to engaging in joy and pleasure. Maybe we're limiting ourselves more than we should. And maybe this is a change that we do need to implement. The sun making a trine to the moon in Capricorn kind of speaks to that because the moon represents us on a more physical and emotional level. The sixth house represents health, sickness, service to others, daily tasks. And so, Capricorn itself can be more conservative. Having the moon in Capricorn really speaks to maybe you being more conservative, being more reserved, maybe not necessarily allowing yourself to have fun. Maybe you're fearful to a certain degree of engaging in things that bring you joy and pleasure because of the overindulgence aspect, especially with Jupiter in the first house. But again, these are just things that we can consider because, again, we do need to transcend certain limitations that we're setting on ourselves. The moon in Capricorn is being ruled by the Saturn in Aries, and Saturn in Aries is in your ninth house of philosophy, mindset. So this is a mindset ordeal, right? You're limiting yourself because you feel like that's what you have to do, but that may not necessarily be the case. All right, we do have the sun making an opposition to the North Node. North Node is in Aquarius. It's in your seventh house of relationships. You should be dealing with people more often than probably what you are doing. But again, this North Node in Aquarius is also being ruled by the Saturn in Aries. Again, this is a mindset. You are limiting yourself. You don't have to do so. Okay, get out there, mingle with people, meet new people, because again, it could be of true value to you to do so. All right, but we have to change how we've been operating. This is why the sun is making a trine to Chiron, Chiron and Taurus in your 10th house, right? You got to remember that Chiron represents our traumatic wounds or experiences, and because it's in your 10th house of public image, reputation, rank, you may not necessarily want your image to change in the minds of other people, or you may not want other people to see you in a different light. But the thing is, life is all about change, and so it's important for you to understand that you're going to change as well. And so how people see you, how people value you, or what people think about you are going to change as well. This Chiron and Taurus is ruled by Venus and Libra in your third house. You may not want people to see you in a different light, but they will inevitably. So it's best to just go ahead and implement the changes and just to show up authentically as yourself. Okay. Now, the sun is making a square to Uranus. Uranus is in your 11th house of other people. Uranus is unexpected events that can take place, sudden changes. The 11th house is our goals, dreams, and aspirations as well. Gemini is dealing with, adaptability in change in and of itself. And we may not be the biggest proponents of change, right? We may not necessarily love to change and to do things differently. Leos are a fixed sign, so they're stubborn, right? As all fixed signs are. Um, but maybe these changes that need to be implemented, maybe it really is of value to you. Maybe you do need to express yourself more. Maybe you do need to communicate yourself more. And maybe you need to change how you are communicating and expressing yourself with other people. Maybe the reason why you have this wound as it pertains to your self image is because of how you're showing up for other people. You got to remember that with the Venus being in Libra, is very much about reciprocity. So people are only going to go off of what you show them. So if you want things to be different, then you need to show them different.